All right, let's welcome Paul Sclafani from the Silver Jackets and the Army Corps of Engineers.
All right, so what I want to do is go off of Tanya's presentation, and I want to talk a little bit about the context of the decisions that were made in the basin. So my purpose of this discussion is maybe to leave you all with a little idea of all the bigger picture of the Columbia River Basin and all the decisions that go behind the scenes. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go through day by day and kind of like just walk through it, like pretend like we're in the event, and we're going to kind of walk through a timeline. This is a big screen. I feel like I got to sit down over here. All right, so let's go Monday, February 5th. Okay, so we're sitting here, you know, a couple of the people at the RCC, the Reservoir Control Center that's in our division office, come to work, and they see, well, we had a pretty wet October, a pretty wet November and December. We're about 110 on average % of normal in precipitation for that time period. Wow, that's a lot of moisture hitting the ground, and it's probably saturating the ground a little bit too. You start looking at the temperature. Tanya brought this up a little bit again. I didn't even put a timeline on that one because I grabbed this from the web. There's a big dip in the temperature. So all that moisture that's in the ground and the warm temperatures, we didn't have much of a snowpack at the beginning of January. Obviously, it builds up by the end of January into February, but that cold air snap freezes a lot of that moisture that's in the ground and creates kind of an ice sheet. In addition to the snow that was accumulating in the mountains, there was some lower level snow as well, and some ice at the lower level too. So now we have a situation where you have stored moisture at mid-level and high-level, right? You know, moving up to about 100%, you know, to kind of normal levels, and the ground's saturated and frozen. We start looking at the measured SWE at a couple of different stations. We see that at the end of January, there's a big uptick in the amount of snow. This is what I was talking about. This is all stored water that's in the basin. So what do we do with this information? Oh, yeah, I should say, the experience of the people at the the Reservoir Control Center say, this kind of looks like a 1964 event. We should probably take some action. The action that they took is lowering the John Day Reservoir down by a foot. Because right at this point, the forecast was that the Portland Harbor was only going to get to 14 feet, and the flood was at 18 feet. So it wasn't a super severe forecast at this point early on. And so we said, well, we're going to get about 50,000 acre feet extra flood storage at John Day. We'll see if what happens there. But as we all know, the forecast worsened. There's a lot more moisture coming in from the ocean. And we're in Tuesday now. And now the forecast says we're probably going to exceed 14 feet. So what do? We say we better call Canada, which is BC Hydro is kind of like the Corps of Engineers in Canada. They control the reservoirs, and we have an agreement with Canada that says if we're in flood control, you know, if we need flood control, we're going to call you and tell you to reduce the flows that come out of Canada into the U.S. That's called the Columbia River Treaty. It's a negotiated treaty that helps us lower the amount of water coming from Canada. We said we're going to call you. We're going to go from 92,000 CFS coming into the U.S. down to 15,000 CFS. So we're really ramping down that flow. In addition, we're going to lower John Day another 1.5 feet. And the whole point of all these decisions is to keep Portland Harbor down below flood stage. Okay. Oh, and I put this map on here to give you an idea of what the spatial geometry of all this is. So obviously we all know Bonneville, Bedales, and John Day, but all the water that comes into Bonneville and Bedales and John Day comes from Canada. Up there at the very top, you have the Duncan, and you have the Arrow Lakes up there. All that feeds into the U.S., comes through Grand Coulee, and comes down past the Snake into Portland, and that'll come relevant in a second. Okay, now it's Wednesday, and flood stage is already reached at Portland. Weather forecast is getting worse. So at this point, we just say we're going to evacuate as much water as we can out of John Day. We're going to try to get as much storage as we can. John Day is going to be the point where we're going to try to absorb a lot of that flood water. From the beginning, Monday down to now, we lowered John Day 4.3 feet. We request additional flood storage from the Snake River dams to hold back water. And we reduce Dorshak outflow to about 90%. So we're really cranking down the water. We're making a decision to release as little water as possible because we're about to get to the peak of the flow. Oh, I may go back there. Can I go back? And this is, I'm talking about the reservoir operations and all the decisions being made, but at the same time, we have emergency operations and putting in these Jersey barriers to support the flood wall, and also we're making emergency decisions on how to handle the waters in downtown Portland. So, moving into Thursday, so now things are getting pretty bad. We now say, we request Idaho Power to reduce flows from Brownlee Dam and reduce flows at Grand Coulee to the point where we have to lower the power output. And Grand Coulee is struggling at this point because it can't produce enough power to meet the demand of the electrical grid. And so the Corps of Engineers makes a decision and says, well, maybe we can pull some power from the Snake River dams, and BPA has to buy power off the market for about $5 million. And at the same time, the USACE requests Middle Columbia to not power peak. In other words, we're not going to run water through the turbines to create power. We're going to just keep a static flow. So all these decisions have to be made to kind of treat the system as a big capacitor, saying we're going to hold back water here, we're going to hold back water here, we're going to release a little water here, and try to manage the system as a complete system. So on Thursday, John Day begins to refill with floodwaters. So now we're taking all the floodwaters coming in from the Columbia and we're putting them in John Day. And by the next morning, John Day is full. About 400,000 acre foot. Now initially, when we lowered it just a foot on that first day, we were only at 50,000 acre feet. We're storing right now 400,000 acre feet on Friday. As the storm moves inland, though, but there's a problem because now we're holding back all the water on the Snake River dams in Grand Coulee, but the storm is moving through, dumping water in Middle Columbia. So there's a real concern that we're going to have overcapacity at all those Snake River and Middle Columbia dams. So we have to call back all the dams upstream in the upper basin in Montana and in Albany Falls and say, you need to hold back water so that Grand Coulee doesn't get too high, so the Snake doesn't get too high. So again, the problem doesn't end with the peak in Portland. We have to follow that storm all the way through to make sure we don't have overflows at any other dams. And we asked Montana to reduce releases by 63%. And so there was flooding, and these pictures are taken from the National Weather Service in Spokane. This is Spokane Falls, and this is the Palouse River up by Colfax, Washington. So there was some flooding inland too. Meanwhile, on the Willamette, I was going to get to that. Dams. So going into the event, we have full storage of floodwaters during the winter season. So we draw down the reservoirs in the winter, and they are low. Because of all the rains, we had about 8% loss, but mostly the dams had the full storage. Virtually all the flooding in the Willamette was due to uncontrolled releases. The intent is to store all the regulated flows into the dams, but we can't control that water that doesn't go into the dams, right? So Johnson Creek is not regulated, Clackamas is not regulated. Some of the basins on the San Am, they're not regulated. So we don't control everything. And we're looking at rainfall. These are rainfall totals, 4-day rainfall totals. I think, Todd, you had some of these numbers up there. Hopefully they match. But, 4-day rainfall total, 9 in Eugene, in Hillsborough, 6, 7, 9 in Newport. So pretty large rainfall totals. The Willamette project was able to capture all of the floodwaters coming into the dams. The only dam that had to release, so what happens is floodwaters comes in and we store as much as we can with minimal releases until we get to a certain point, and then we have to pass inflow. We can't store it to the point where we can't store anymore, we have to pass inflow. For this event, the only reservoir that had to pass the inflow was Foster, which is on the South Santiam River. All the other dams were able to store all the floodwaters, but all the unregulated streams was what caused the flooding. Let's see here. What am I looking at? Precip versus SWE. This just gives you an idea of how much volume of water we're talking about. Saddle Mountain had 35 inches. All of these Santiam basins had quite a bit of precip and SWE. And so what I'm getting at here is that trying to get an understanding of where that volume of water was coming from. Most of the problem was in the Santiam Basin, the Clackamas, the Tualatin, the Yamhill. Of course, the northwest basins got hit with water, but down by, say, Cottage Grove or Eugene, it really wasn't like a 100-year event. As you move further down, it was much less severe, but in that Santiam Basin and the Malala Basin and Clackamas and further north, you had the most severity in terms of the amount of water. And this graph just shows you the percent of, you can't really read that, but the percent of the reservoir flood storage that was used for all these dams. And basically, the point I'm making here is you were 90%, 100% at John Day, obviously. Dorena was, I don't know why Dorena was high, but it was up at 90%. What's that? Yes, well, it's a small reservoir. Good point. But Blue River, Greening, Peter, and Foster, and Detroit and Big Cliff, we were all storing at 90%. So we were storing all this water in order to prevent the floodwaters downstream. And of course, we did the best we could with all that. So, these reservoirs are like capacitors. You fill them up and you kind of hold back the water. It builds up that energy, and then you slowly release it after the storm. Oh, how do I do this? This is going to be good. So that leads you into a little video that I'd like to show, if I can get there. Oh, did it work? No. Yeah, so this was a little video that we put together. Oh, look, there's Selena, Les Miller up there. Probably the biggest picture of Selena I've ever seen.
So quickly.
And I've seen the water change over the seasons quite a bit, but nothing like I saw in February 1996.
This is my first major disaster, and I think we were not really totally prepared for it. My name is John Kitzhauer. I was the governor of Oregon from 1995 until 2003, and so I was in office during the Great Flood of '96. It started raining in January pretty heavily, and the soil got saturated, so the river levels were rising all through January. And sort of the perfect storm occurred in early February when we had a big snowstorm, and it froze. It snowed again, so there's a lot of snow sitting on top of the ice, basically. And then we had a chinook wind that came through and melted it all. So the rivers are already full, and that created the circumstances that led to the flood.
Les Miller. I was the Chief of Emergency Management Branch at the time of the flood, and November of 1995, We had a very serious flood event, but it barely touched us. It hit mostly the Seattle district up north. My emergency operations center chief calls me and says, Les, get your butt down here. This event has shifted south. The dynamics of our geography and the play off the ocean, you just don't know.
I'm Selena Hart. I was a senior in high school. I lived in Estacada, and I lived right on the river. I've been living there since I was in grade school. I remember it being really cold, and then we had some rain event come in, and the river levels kept rising, as they had in the past, which we were familiar with. But they kept rising and kept rising to a point that we actually had to leave our house. We had to evacuate.
The Corps, with all of its flood control operations, was doing everything it could to balance what was coming down the Columbia and the Willamette River and all the minor tributaries that we had dams on. A lot of it was providing technical assistance. How could the local officials deal with the situation better? Did they need resources like sandbags, pumps, so we could move those supplies and equipment to where we needed to in short order? We moved over 1 million sandbags out of Southern California and brought them up and put them in our dams and in our navigation warehouses along the coast, whether it was down in Coupé or in Astoria, so that they were pre-positioned close to where they would be needed. We almost emptied everything during that event.
The whole neighborhood was underwater at various steps. A lot of landslides and just high water levels, all over the place. The water levels were so forceful, caused a lot of erosion, and actually destroyed the road that came into our neighborhood. So although the river rose and fell within a day or two, we weren't able to access our property for multiple days. There was a lot of devastation. A lot of houses completely destroyed. The roads were completely scoured away, so there was big holes in them. So you would have tried to go in there when there was water there. You would have been a lot of danger.
I felt my job was to, first of all, reassure Oregonians. So I had regular press conferences and told people exactly what was going on and what we were trying to do to address it. I traveled a lot. I tried to show up in the places that were hit so that there was some presence. And we spent a lot of time during those first few weeks trying to mitigate the damage that was occurring. We had this project, sandbag, along the Willamette downtown Portland. We had food issues in a couple of little isolated communities on the Oregon coast, had to get food to those people. So these problems that kept popping up, I think we weathered it pretty well. And remarkable heroics by the National Guard and a lot of first responders in helping people out.
What was so amazing is just having the community come together, as everyone was really trying to support each other. There were other entities that were volunteers that helped bring food and supplies, and were able to help. There's a lot of debris that winds up coming down the river when you have a flood, so there was hot tubs, fences, people's belongings that were in their basements just spread all around. So there's a lot of cleanup that has to happen after it. Just the dirt and the mud, the trees. There's just a lot of cleanup that has to happen. So it took us multiple years to get back to what we had before.
After the flood, there was a lot of damage. And in fact, there was so much damage that Congress didn't have enough money in the pot to repair them. So engineering worked with all the rest of the team, which included construction, real estate, contracting. But that was probably one of the most important parts. We got them repaired. We were able to get that trust by the local jurisdictions and then continue to keep that agreement. In fact, that agreement is even stronger these days than it was back then.
I think people were grateful that someone was showing up. We were worried both about the immediate well-being of themselves and their loved ones in different parts of the state. So communication was really important to let people know what was happening. And they were really concerned about how they build back, how they come out of this if you've lost your home. And then to bring the people who actually could make a difference in the lives of these folks who suffered damage or threats. And that was primarily the National Guard and the emergency management team. And they're the ones that get the credit.
Definitely, as I look back, that event has really shaped what I do now. I really have a passion for trying to do flood risk management and helping communities from flood risk. I was in school, so I was a senior in high school. I went to school the next day, but I was full of adrenaline and wanted to see what's going on. It was a precursor to my career now. I took my parents' car and drove around and looked at the river system, and so I was able to go up and see what was going on in Clackamas in Oregon City, where falls looked like they were flowing backwards. They were so high. I've never seen the falls that high before. Still the biggest flood I've ever encountered, and obviously now to be in the career that I'm in, to experience that and try to help communities that experience that now. We're learning more and more about atmospheric rivers in general. Atmospheric river science is fairly new. We're actually doing a study here at the Portland District looking at atmospheric rivers and those forecasts and how can we manage even better if we can. So we're really excited to better understand atmospheric rivers and the impacts to our communities.
We were fortunate, again, because we'd already started this interaction with the different agencies together before this event. What we saw, we just saw it get stronger. We actually set up the pathway for the district to be able to provide as much support to the state and the local jurisdictions as we were. I got involved with an organization called Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. They're all the churches and social clubs that want to help in disasters. You hear about them all the time. The Salvation Army, Red Cross, Scouts, Boy Scouts of America. We were literally invited in to come and talk to them about how they could assist in their local communities' flood fights. That was an incredible experience, being able to have that opportunity to be at the front door with them and understand what their issues were even deeper.
What I felt when I went to these communities was the sense of general empathy and compassion for one another, which I think always comes out in natural disasters. I'll always remember that, and I'll always believe that that is something that's inherent in all of us, and I think we need to remember leaning on that as a choice.
So, was there any lightning and thunder in the 96 event? No. I didn't have the heart to tell him that, but it was good. It was a good effect. I appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, we're back, right? Okay, so just to wrap up, these numbers are probably well published. About $300 million, in the reports that I have, about $300 million was the preliminary damage assessment. That's $1996. There's about $400 million of uninsured damage from the Oregonian reporting, and a lot of livestock that was stranded out in Tillamook. That was kind of sad. Turbidity was a big issue. There's landslides all over the state, so you don't think about that very often, but the intakes to the water supply for Salem is right there on the North Santiam. And so we flushed some flows out to try to wash out that turbidity from all the landslides, the mud and the debris flows. And then there was lots of teams out deployed for damage assessment, technical support, perishable data with high watermarks, landslide inspection, and a lot more. So it was, the event's one thing, and then the cleanup and the recovery is almost longer than the event itself. It was estimated, this is an important point, that we reduced the stage at Eugene about 9 feet from because of regulation. At Salem, it was about 7.5 feet. By the time we got to Portland, it was about 1.9 feet. And the reason why those numbers go down to from 9 to 7.5 to 1.9 is because of all that unregulated water coming into the Willamette. Up in the Eugene, we can control a lot more of that water to prevent flooding. And the graph on the right is from the post-flood report. I'm not sure these are the final numbers, but it gives you the idea. The frequency of the flood that we had around Portland, the Molalla, Yam Hill, Tualatin, right around, there's basically 100 years flood, what we always think about. this North San Am, probably about a 100-year flood. As we move further south in the basin, though, that frequency or severity goes down quite a bit. So it was really a northern basin. Have we seen the 90s? That was good, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have seen floods, and so we haven't seen a 96 event same way since for the last 30 years. And one of the post-flood kind of findings was that we kind of become complacent in the weather that we get, where it's not that severe. But we have seen floods, and it's important every time we go through these events, the 11 event, 12 event, 15 event, we ask ourselves, you know, are we prepared for the event? So one of the findings or the outcomes from the post-flood reports was that we need to maintain our coordination. From the 1996 event, the Office of Emergency Management created the Interagency Hazard Mitigation Team, and that's a group in emergency management that coordinates amongst federal and state agencies. There's a flood subcommittee of that. It's called Silver Jackets, and that's why you saw the Silver Jackets out there, and I did Bob mention Silver Jackets. And that's really the community of professionals that monitor the floods, work through flood events, but also work through preparation for floods and mitigation. And so we work with weather services on that team, the USGS, the Corps of Engineers, state, DLCD, OEM. And we really are a community that works together and kind of helps each other pick up where we all have technical expertise, pitch in, and help us prepare and be more resilient as a state. And that's really all I have. I touched on, the last bullet. You know, this was back in 1996. They said this, that spending cuts forced USGS and NOAA to reduce the monitoring background for river flow measurement. I think that's true as years go on. I mean, we need to maintain that funding for gauges and monitoring. That's all I have. Thank you very much.